one last thing I want to talk about as far as the profile is, what's a story that you've been surprised by when studying? Like what story or profile did you go
Mm.
into thinking one thing and coming out the other side being kind of shocked at what you learned from it?
Oh, okay. So one of my favorite profiles that I've done or dossiers, like where I dive deep into a person's life. I had read a little bit about Grant Achatz. Do you know who that is?
I don't.
Okay, yeah. So I don't think a lot of people do. I certainly didn't. But he is a chef, and he created Alinea, which is this restaurant in Chicago, super innovative, and it was like the world's best restaurant for a number of years. But Grant is considered this like savant of a chef, like really, really incredible, always at the cutting edge. And the reason that I found him so fascinating is because he he thinks very much like Elon Musk, just in a very different industry. And he's
Mm,
taken food and he's basically gone from like first principles to say, I'm going to be inspired by everything in my life. And that's how I'm going to approach the dining experience. So he asked himself, why do we have to eat with a fork and a knife and a plate? Like, why is the plate manufacturer deciding what dining looks like? So he got rid of
mm,
like plates and forks and knives. And then he went to a museum and was inspired by this piece of art. And he was like, I want to eat off of that. So he created a tablecloth that looks like art that you could eat from with your hands. And then it is just he's so innovative that he kept doing this, and every 6 months he would tell his staff, like, trash this menu, we're starting over. And the reason he
mm.
did that, and they hated it, obviously, they're like, this is really good. Like, people are really loving this menu. And he's like, I don't
Right.
care. If we keep doing this, we're going to become complacent. So
Mm.
to promote innovation, he would do that every 6 months. And then one day, the irony of it all is that he got stage 4 tongue cancer. It's like, imagine being a chef and
Wow.
getting cancer on your tongue, which is like your taste buds and everything. But what he learned from that experience is that taste is actually very little of it comes from your tongue and your taste buds. A lot of it is visual and smell based. So
Mm.
he played with flavors, and he made like tomatoes that look like strawberries and strawberries that look like tomatoes, and people's senses were like totally off. It's just like, I really appreciate people who are so innovative and think so differently than I do, that
Mm.
it forced me to ask myself, what is a profile? Because
Right.
until now, I had always thought that a profile was found in a magazine. It was long form, it was 2,000 words. But like
Yeah.
what Brandon Stanton does with Humans of New York is a profile. And like all
Right.
this, your podcast is a profile. And so it makes you question a lot of things. And once you actively start thinking about these things, you realize you're learning without trying to learn.
For sure. For sure. That's so crazy and so interesting. I love one thing I haven't talked at all on this podcast about, but I want to now really briefly is first principles thinking. And I think
Mm.
that's what makes someone like this chef or an Elon Musk so interesting, is the ability to go to first principles and think from that point of view. Will you tell me what that term means to you, first principles thinking, and maybe what it looks like in practice?
Yeah, to me, it's like basically you take conventional thought and you're like, okay, so this is what everyone says it is. But if we peel it back, what is the very, very essence of where we can get? And that's kind of how I now make decisions. I used to always start. So, as a metaphor, Elon Musk uses this. He basically explains first principles thinking as a metaphorical tree. And when you're trying to learn something for the first time, let's say for him, in his case, it was rockets, you can't start with all the details, which are the leaves and the branches and the whatever. You have to start from like the trunk and the roots
Mm.
and understand physics before you start understanding how to create a rocket. For me, a lot of times when you're making decisions, you're looking at like the outcomes first instead of being like, hold on, why do I have to make this specific decision in the first place? And once you like peel it all back and just, I think for journalists, it's easier because you're just used to asking why so much. when you get to like the very basic why, you can make such better decisions than starting from the panicked details and trying to go back.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like I think that's such a good way of putting it. I think it's like going to the core of the problem versus the
Mhm.
symptoms of the problem.
Yes.
Like I think like what you were describing in that chef, like that's a very weird but great example of first principles thinking where he's just like, wait, why do we use plates?
Yeah.
This is just a thing that was given to us and that we've just subconsciously assigned to being the quote unquote right way of doing something, but why?
Yeah, and what do they look like that? And one more example from him, the most incredible thing that he did, which is like the epitome of first principles thinking, is he he asked, which I don't think anybody has ever asked, why do we eat using this motion? And if you can't see me right now, I'm like using, putting food to my mouth with a fork or a spoon or some kind of utensil. And he's like, why do humans eat that way? It's literally hand to mouth. And then his team was like, what are you talking about? How else would
Hmm.
you eat? And he's like, let's figure out another way. So he created this like balloon of made of sugar particles and compounds or whatever that would float to you and you would eat it while holding the balloon just with your mouth. Incredible.
Wow.
Like this, but he broke the idea. Like that's the most basic, like universal idea that you put food to your mouth. You bring food to your mouth with your hand. Like there is no other way, but he
Right.
changed it. And so I think that that's what makes it interesting and memorable for people. And those are the people that are like truly original thinkers.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love thinking that way for an individual creator, for someone listening and even for myself, like how do you approach, maybe your different tastes, your interests, your skills, and how do you go back to first principles about what you're trying to make? And I think that
Yeah.
we all have a lot of assumptions based on the people we follow, if you want to make YouTube videos, you probably watch a lot of YouTubers and you're probably thinking, well, I have to do it this way because Casey Neistat does it this way or whatever,
Hmm.
name your YouTuber. But in reality, it's like, why? Ask yourself why you feel the need to do exactly what you've been kind of subconsciously taught. And maybe if you go a different route from that baseline level, you can make something a lot more unique and a lot more a picture of who you truly are too. It can be a lot more like authentic to a person to go from that first principle of who you are versus what you're just seeing online or what you're seeing from other creators and just trying to copy what already exists.
You know, it's so hard, Alex, and I struggle with this because a lot of the advice that you get as a creator is find your people or find a circle or a community that's already doing what you're doing and you can brainstorm with them and you can like talk about ideas, etc. But like you're already surrounded by those people. The problem is what you just mentioned is like, well, if you go on YouTube and you see like how everybody else does it, you kind of internalize it without realizing that you're doing that.
Mm,
That's why like I find it fascinating. So many inventions and innovations and stuff have come from people with fresh eyes who have never been in the industry before and they
mm,
just don't know that it's always been done this way. It's happened in media. It happened to Sarah Blakely with Spanx. She was never in the fashion world. She had no idea, so she's like, I'm just gonna cut
mhm.
off the feet off my pantyhose and there you go. And it's like nobody in the fashion world would have been like, this is high fashion, like, but
Right.
but she didn't know what she didn't know. So that actually ended up weirdly helping her. So it's like, yes, you need the community, but how do you avoid from it becoming your echo chamber that like imprisons you?
Yeah, for sure. And that's what makes a creator unique is drawing from different sources and different, everybody has things that they're a super nerd about that other people
Hmm.
aren't. And it's like, how can you make those like super nerdy things like align with what you're working on and creating? It's kind of like like my favorite mental model is like always a Venn diagram. I feel like I think in Venn diagrams all the time, just like what are these two circles and what's the connecting part in the middle that
Mm,
you can share. And I think like life is a lot of Venn diagrams. Being human is a Venn diagram of like a million things. And I think creating and the best creators are a Venn diagram of two maybe weird opposing ideas that wouldn't sound like they would work on the surface, but once you put them together, it's like magic.